In the coaching and consulting world, everyone talks about success, but few talk about what it really takes to get there. I'm Shantina Hollie, and this is Coaches Unplugged, where we pull back the curtain and have honest conversations with the people shaping the industry. In each episode, you'll hear how top coaches and consultants built their businesses, faced their challenges, and continue to grow both in impact and in mindset. No fluff, no pretense, just real stories, real lessons, and real talk about what it takes to build something that lasts. Today on Coaches Unplugged, we are joined by Heather Albarano, owner of RCR Consulting and president of Kaizen Human Capital. Heather has built her career scaling HR organizations, strengthening leadership teams, and driving real business performance. With deep expertise in employment law, people strategy, and organizational transformation, she brings both precision and perspective to what it takes to build workplaces that actually work. Please welcome Heather Albarano to Coaches Unplugged. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. And thank you for that wonderful welcome.
Yes, we are so happy to have you here. We would like to jump right into how did you get started and what drew you to this field? We find that a lot of our guests, it's not a straight lane to where they are today. So we're just interested in hearing how you got started.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I agree with you, right? It's never a straight line to get to where you're at. So for me, the journey really started. I was in college working on my bachelor's degree. So we're going back just 3-4 years ago now. And I was majoring in psychology. I thought I wanted to become a therapist. And one of my required courses was this thing called industrial organizational psychology. And I was like, what is this that I have to take? And as I was reading the information, it's basically like the psychology of businesses. And I was like, no, thank you. This is not what I want to do with my life. I had zero interest in it. I proceeded to go to the advisor at the school and try to argue that this had nothing to do with what I wanted to do with my life. I needed an exception. I don't want to waste my time on this stupid course. Needless to say, I lost that battle. And the first day in class, I fell in love, head over heels. I was like, oh my gosh, this is it for me. There was everything about it with the job analysis and executive leadership and the evolution organizations go through. Oh my gosh, it had me hook, line, and sinker. I was in my first semester of my senior year though. So I made the strategic decision to continue to complete with my bachelor's. But I adjusted all of my courses that I could at that point to really focus in that human resources management, human capital management, and this IO psychology space. Got my first job in HR right out of college. I was very lucky. It's not always the easiest thing. Even those entry level positions aren't always entry level. They want some kind of experience, which is hard. But I lucked out. I had an amazing mentor. And I would say that was my first opportunity where the company really did a lot to invest in me and assigned me an executive coach to help me level up. And I would say that was transformational to me in multiple ways. Is one, I could see how an executive coach can take someone, especially even early in their career, and helped me set up the foundations for myself in my career. It really set the organization that I was working for on a different trajectory as well, because you were able to hire this more junior talent, really train and invest them up inside the organization, and created almost competitive advantage right within inside of that team by making that investment in a more junior talent. And then it also led me to where I wanted to be able to pay that back eventually, right? I remember one of the first things that manager told me when she made that investment is, we're taking a chance, we're investing in you. I want to make sure you pay this forward and do the same thing one day. And so that was really kind of that early start, right, for me as far as where I wanted to go. The idea of starting my own thing, being able to pay back into the community, the benefits of executive coaching, even in early career, which I would say a lot of businesses and professionals don't always think about, right? I think a lot of times the
Yeah.
executive coaching is where we see a lot more of it, right? It's that senior level that we typically target. But there's a really great market for some of the more junior talent as well that can take advantage of the coaching.
That is just, I mean, what blessing it was to
Yeah.
that early in your career have that type of access to an
Yeah.
executive coach. We hear over and over just how valuable executive coaching is for anyone, any professional at any level, but you don't see a lot of companies investing in their employees, especially a junior level employee.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable, and again, there's pieces I still have a book that we worked through called For Your Improvement, which is one I use today in some of my coaching with executives. We use it in, early manager trainings, and
Mhm.
some of those coaching sessions that we do as well, and again, we're going back, well, really probably 20 plus years since that happened, but yeah, I mean, again, I still tap into some of those foundations that that first executive coach helped to instill in me.
That's great. That's such a progressive, even like you said, even dating back to some time ago, it's such a progressive model to have as a company to invest into their employees that way. That's great. And what kind of coaching do you offer to your clients, and what how do you stand out from others in your field?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say where we've really found our niche. So, I'm an HR professional by trade, general business. I have had the benefit, right, of starting coaching myself from an early career. I've worked for large Fortune 500s where I was able to also get executive coaching from, kind of some of the bigger players out there that,
Mhm.
and some of the development programs and everything there. And then recently about 5.5, 6 years ago now, really started focusing in on small businesses and startups. And that's where I would say my niche has really grown for
Mhm.
both RCR and Kaizen is working more in this, kind of sub 250 live types of organizations, anywhere from getting ready to hire their first employee kind of up. And the unique challenges I would say that come with those types of businesses that they're facing. And so from an executive coach or not even just executive, right? Because we do coaching from a wide range of different
Mhm.
areas as far as like, hey, what are some things that you need to know about before you make that first leap into hiring your first employees, right? And what are some of the things that you need to be thinking about? What are some of the challenges and working with founders, CEOs, solopreneurs, right, that are looking to make that transition on what are some of the pitfalls, right, that we
Yeah.
see? What are the gotchas that you need to be thinking about? Even down to one of the things we like to share with some of our, founders that we're working with in this is when you're getting ready to make that first hire, that's 50% of your team, right? And thinking about it from that perspective, from that numbers, right? Or, let's say you're getting ready to hire number four, that's 25% of your team. There's so much writing on that, and making sure that that first hire can make or break an organization, right? I like to use me and my team as an example. When we made our first hire, she's still with me today. She's been with us for 5 years. She is my right hand. She is a rock on my organization. She lives the values that we were trying to, develop and espouse, and having that clear vision and how important a lot of that is. And so that's really where we focus. I would say as far as from a coaching and a business standpoint is making sure companies understand how incredibly important that is as they're building that out and having that clear vision before they make that leap.
Yeah. And something that you said, your first hire is now 50% of your team. And when you frame it that way, it sounds like a huge chunk of, are we aligned? Do we work well
Yeah.
together? Do you understand our mission? Like, it seems like a huge risk. And things that I'm sure a solopreneur or small business doesn't necessarily consider upfront, especially if they are finding that they need to offboard some of the work that they're doing. They're just looking for help. So, what kind of conversations or what kind of recommendations do you give to your clients?
Yeah, so I mean, you touched on a lot of it, right? Wanting to be very intentional on what is it you're trying to build, right? What is that culture? What is that environment? What are your deal breakers, right? What are things that even though this may be your first time making this adventure, right? What are things that you've seen in the workplace that have frustrated you with your coworkers, right? Or team members? What did you love about organizations you've worked with? What have you not liked about
Mhm.
organizations you've worked with? And being very intentional, right? about what you're trying to build, and then looking to hire people, right, that really fit that, right? So making sure we're looking past those resumes, right? Looking for skills that maybe align. One of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of businesses make when they're getting ready to make a first hire, even just the first few, a lot of times they'll go after big business experience because they want somebody who has a lot of this foundation, and maybe has been taught or been benefiting from some of these formal programs. And sometimes that can work out, but a lot of times what we see is in these smaller businesses, you have to, when you're in a big organization, a lot of people are very much, this is my role, this is my scope, and this is my lane. And when
Hmm.
you're going into more of these entrepreneurial environments, there is no lane, right? It's not defined. And you need to find somebody who is going to roll up their sleeves, gonna do what it takes. I'm
Yep.
gonna work outside my job description. There is no job description in many situations, right? As we kind of go down this path. And so really making sure that they're finding people that have that hunger, that desire, the ability to work in ambiguity, the ability to work with today may be this goal and this may be where we're
Yep.
working, but 3 hours later, it could be a totally different direction, and finding people that are flexible to and thrive in that environment. And again, a lot of times we see them attracted to that bigger employment environment.
Yeah.
A lot of times those people don't always work as well in those entrepreneurial environments. And so sometimes working for a blend, right, of that, or what types of experiences or other workforces, right, industries that may translate well into your business, are some of the things we encourage people to take a look at. But again, being very intentional with what you're trying to build.
Yeah, that is another excellent point. Like the better fit may be someone who is willing to wear multiple hats and to
Jack of all
evolve.
trades.
Jack of all trades, exactly. So, thinking from that perspective, instead of I want the most seasoned, trained person, could be a make or break for your business.
Hmm.
So, in that same vein, I'd like to transition the conversation a little bit back to you personally. In your roles, what does a typical day, if it's typical, look like for you?
There is no typical day. Again, I mean, our bread and butter, we do HR, right? And we do the full suite of HR, right? So we help with the hiring and the firing and the employee relations and the benefits and the payroll and all that.
Yep.
And coaching is a piece of that we do, right, with our business leaders that we support. And so, any day it could be something different, right? I mean, I was talking to a leader yesterday about some strategies. They're in an industry that is been hit. They're in the solar industry and they are really impacted right now, where a lot of the subsidies and stuff like that have expired. It's expensive, right? And the industry is struggling and wanting to, he's grown through this despite some of these challenges, but is getting to the point where he's like, hey, I feel like I need somebody who, we don't have anyone on our leadership team today who has the experience running a business the size that we are today. And I
Mhm.
feel like we're missing something. Right. And so his immediate reaction was, I want to go hire a COO. And some of that conversation was like, okay, maybe, but like you may not need a full time COO. Right. And so coaching through what some of that may look like, right? Hey, maybe we get an executive coach that can help train and develop this team that has run these types of operations, who's going to be willing to work alongside you, right, to help develop that competency within inside your team because you're happy with the team. They're living your core values. Your leadership team is working. They just may not have had some of that experience and exposure. So instead of spending, either having to let somebody on the team go or spending that money for 150, 200,000 plus a year resource, right?
Yeah.
Get someone fractional to be able to help subsidize that, or getting an executive coach in that can potentially help to assist on some of those areas is an example of one that, like, literally I just got a call from him yesterday, right? Of saying, I'm dealing with this. What are your thoughts?
And tell me, for I'm sure in your experience with clients and those who you're working with and helping to strategize their businesses or their next move or ways that they may pivot or shift, how do you then implement that for yourself personally? We
Okay.
talk to a lot of coaches, and I'm always curious how you manage the work that you pour into those that you're coaching, and also leave some room for yourself mentally. Like, you have to be sharp. You have to be on. So,
Yeah.
what do you do for yourself to keep, your mental health and top of mind?
Yeah. It's a great question. I was actually just talking to somebody earlier today about that. Self-care, I think, is very important,
Yeah.
especially when you're running your own business. When I was getting started, I can't tell you how many nights I cried myself to sleep going, what did I do? Why did I leave my super stable corporate job? I'm never going to be able to make this work. And I learned then, somebody told me, self-care,
Mhm.
finding whatever it is that re-energizes and helps you reset, finding time in the day or the week to be able to clear your thoughts and clearly think through of what's happening, right? And so for me, that is yoga. I love yoga. It gives me that time to be able to center. I have time carved out in my day to make sure I can go to the studio, do that. Massages, right, is another big one that I try to
Mhm.
make sure I do at least once a month, especially being that desk warrior, all that tension carries up in
Yes.
your upper shoulders, right? Whatever that may be, for others, it could be, going out and hanging out with friends or, vacationing is a big one too for us and our family. I've got 3 young boys as well. And so making sure that, I'm trying to how do you juggle all of it, right?
Right.
And that's a big space that we like to do too a lot with women who are in the in the career in careers and trying to figure out, how to find that work life balance and doing it all. But yeah, making sure you've got time for yourself that you're carving out.
Yeah, it's so important. And like you said, intentionally scheduling and carving out time for that, like,
Mhm.
it's so needed, regardless to what industry or field you're in. It seems like today everyone
Yeah.
is running on both ends. It's hard to balance everything. So it's good to hear from those who own businesses and still working in corporate or doing both, like,
Yeah.
tips on how to make sure you're putting yourself first.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the other big one that I would say is it's okay to say no, right?
Yeah.
If especially and that was something I had to learn sometimes the hard way, and especially as you're starting, it's really hard to say no, right, to a potential client. But if you start talking to a client and they're not the right fit for you,
Yeah.
as hard as it is to say no to that money and that relationship, if they're not the right fit, they're going to drain you so much more and take your time and attention away from what you could be doing and what you could be adding value.
Mm.
And so, really making sure you find that ability to be able to say no and draw that line of, I'm not going to compromise X in this pursuit.
That, you bring up a good point that it made me think of a question. We talk to coaches that are in different areas of starting their own business. And one of the guests that we talked to said something similar to what you said earlier. Like, I took the leap. I am now out of corporate and working for myself. And I'm thinking, what the heck did I do this for? But at the same time, she had a pull to make it out of corporate because it's like a pseudo job security, especially today. Like, everything that's happening with AI and
Yeah.
companies are cutting back. And to have something that you can sustain on your own feels very scary, especially in the beginning. So, what advice would you have for someone who's starting out and maybe they feel like they can't say no because monetarily they need that client,
Yeah.
but it might not be a good fit? Like, how do you overcome that pressure?
Whew, it's a hard one, right? And to me, it takes a lot of self-reflection and time, um, talking to others. I'm happy to talk to somebody through it if they're struggling with that, right? And sharing some of the horror stories, through where I was like, no, I'm going to push through it because I want this money, I want this contract, I want this deal, and had regretted it and seen how
Uh-huh.
it had negatively impacted other parts of the business, right? There's one who, and I'm in a little bit of a different situation now, right? Because I've got a team, right? And I've got 20
Yeah.
people that are working for us today. But, there's one client in particular that, gosh, I remember when we were going through the RFP process and I was talking to one of my senior team members and I was like, this is Like, this is it. We're done. We're not going back and forth with this client anymore. I'm done. And we didn't hear from them for 8 months because they were a mess. Like, they just kept
Mm.
coming back, kept coming back. "I want this modified. What about this? What about that?" And, and I was like, they're a mess. And I knew that they were
Mhm.
a mess and that they didn't know what they wanted and they had poor communication and they were very hot and cold. And I wanna say it was about 8 months later, they followed back up and were like, "All right, we're ready to go, like, today." And I was like, I knew in my heart that I shouldn't have said yes, and I said yes. And we jumped through all kinds of hoops to get them because they were also like, "Okay, we're ready to go, like, right now, tomorrow." And I was like, "Okay, we can't do tomorrow," right?
Yeah.
Because of what they needed. And it had such a negative impact on my team. I lost some
Yeah.
key players because it was just a toxic environment that they were working with, end to end. So I lost some valuable resources on my team. It impacted because we had to pull so much over to this incredibly high maintenance client. We lost and impacted other clients that had been long-term clients, and the
Mhm.
amount that we had to, like, repair some of those relationships and that damage, and even 2 years later, like, it was a costly, painful mistake. Silver lining, because I always try to find a silver lining in everything, is that it gave us that opportunity to really say, "Never again."
Yeah.
And so we have, really kind of stepped up what our vetting criteria is because it can, and that's I think the message, right, is it can damage your brand reputation, can
Yeah.
damage your reputation. It's not worth it, right? Like, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, it is just not worth it. I mean, we were up all hours of the night with this client. I lost vacations where I was working this entire time with this one particular client. And, like, I look back and all I have is regret. Just
Yeah.
pure regret on it, and it's that shoulda, coulda, woulda, I knew
Yeah.
better, and you gotta trust yourself as hard as it is to say no, you gotta trust yourself.
Yeah. And just
And
to
remembering,
underline,
you're trusting yourself is what also got you to where you're at today,
I
right?
yes. Yeah, I was just about to say, to underline what you're saying, I feel like the lesson in that was to trust your gut, trust yourself. And I
Yep.
find that when talking to those who take the leap from corporate into entrepreneurship, there is a little bit of a thought process for how do I not think like an employee,
Yeah.
but think of now myself as the CEO, the strategizer. And it takes a little bit to switch from that mindset.
It does. There's a great book out there called "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." And
Mm,
it's used a lot for, somebody who's making that leap from an individual contributor into more of a manager role, and what made you successful as an individual contributor isn't going to make you successful as a manager. But it's a great book as far as just those concepts of, like, that evolution you need to go through and the things we're so as humans, we want to latch onto and stick with the things that made us successful. Right.
mhm.
And as you progress in your career, the things that made you successful maybe earlier on aren't going to be what's going to make you successful today. And that's really the whole premise of that book. That to me is just again, it's a great one that we've used a lot in, for people that are making leaps into different roles in the organization, and to forget that sometimes you need to let go of that control.
Yeah. I'm taking a mental note to circle back to that book. Sounds like a good one. If we can just unpack a little bit about what you see happening in the industry with everything that is changing today. So, for example, I mentioned AI. We had the COVID epidemic that hit that forced folks to be remote. What are some changes that you are seeing happening in the industry today that maybe weren't there 5, 10, 15 years ago? And how's it changing the way you work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, whew, gosh, that's a lot to unpack because there's
Yeah,
so much I would say that's
yeah,
changing at record speeds, right? Obviously COVID was transformational. Some of the things we thought that were going to last with COVID, though, like especially the remote work, we kind of thought was going to be here to stay.
yeah,
A lot of businesses have decided not to, which has been, to me, I would say that was one of the more surprising things that I would say is the amount of businesses that are pulling people back into the office because of the cost, right? Just that
yeah,
the expenditure on having physical office space and the disruption to work life balance. It's really hit a lot of, again, one of our big areas that we focus on is women, right? And particularly that are balancing motherhood and work have started to have to pull back out of the workplace because,
Yeah.
it's too much for them to be able to commute into an office and help be there for the kids in that environment. And with some of the labor shortages, right, that, they keep talking about, right, as baby boomers and stuff are starting to retire, we've got less people that are ready to enter the work environment, a lot of the trades in particular. So, again, you think about like your electricians, your plumbers, your construction, there's not a lot of labor out there that's ready to step up into that. Some of the clients we support are in that area and the amount that people are demanding, right, from a compensation standpoint in some of these labor shortages,
Yeah.
definitely transforming things. And then, of course, AI, right, and how that
Yeah.
has become so disruptive, right? I would say, the big thing is you've got to learn it, right? If you're
Mhm.
not leveraging AI today, you need to figure out how you're gonna leverage it.
Mhm.
It is transformational as far as those, any of those types of administrative lower level tasks, using it to help put together presentations, like, right, you still need to look at it, right? You still need to have
Right.
that thought and that expertise that maybe the AI doesn't necessarily have yet. But it's almost like having an assistant that you can talk to and give that information to, as far as like freeing your time up to focus on things that are going to be more strategic, and be able to provide more value inside of the organization. And so it's one of these things, like, I do believe it's going to start putting, some positions that were more tactical or administrative out, right? It's going to
Mhm.
push that out. And so how do you prepare for that with inside of the business you may be building, as a
Yeah.
totally second nature to him, right? I've
Yeah.
got some clients who don't even know what Gemini is, right?
Yeah.
Let alone any of the other AI tools out there like Claude and Anthropic. Well, it has been at least in the news a little bit more lately, or, ChatGPT, what have you, and how do you leverage and lean into that, right? When you've got, again, you've got
Right.
a big, diverse workforce that's some are gravitating to it at a very young age, and others are like not really comfortable with it yet.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of for those who don't understand it, like you said, God bless our younger generation who are being raised with it, and it's like
Yeah.
second nature for them.
Yeah.
But for those who are adopting it along the way and trying to navigate it, there's some fear for folks who aren't
Yeah.
familiar with it. And
Yeah.
we've even heard fear of people hearing it's going to lay off an entire department or it's going to impact us this way. What would you say, like, for from your perspective in an industry that is very people focused and
Yeah.
relationship focused? How do you think that AI will impact, or how do you think it will impact the industry that you're in?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been leaning into AI a lot lately, right? And transparency. One of the first places we've started really leaning into is how can we leverage AI to do a lot more of our administrative tasks,
Mhm.
auditing things like payroll
Mhm.
records, right? And so you talk about that people focus, right? Payroll processing has always been, even with the ADPs and the
Yeah.
Paylocities of the world, right? It's still fraught with human error and human mistakes and somebody keying information incorrectly, or, manual audit checks, right? It has that risk where, utilizing, AI code, right? And again, not using maybe
Yep.
some of the, not throwing it into a free chat GPT, right? Because you want to be careful with some of the security, but, there's some of them out there where you can develop some of the code behind the scenes, which is a
Yeah.
newer job, right?
Mhm.
So even though it's going to be replacing some jobs, other opportunities are going to be opening up where we're leveraging more in that HR space, people that are really good with some of this AI code to help code some of this in the background to help us run some of these payrolls, remove some of those manual entries, human error risk, right?
Yep.
So that that employee experience at the end of the day, right? An employee expects to be paid. That's their base expectation. And they expect to be paid on time and accurately. And if we can remove some of those errors out of it, it's improving that employee experience. That said, right, it's going to end up eliminating jobs, right? Now,
Yeah.
there's going to still need to be people who are, there's still human interaction, right, that has to happen with those tools. There still is checks, right, that we want to do with the AI. There's conversations about AI hallucination and everything. So you still have to have somebody that's running this, but instead of taking a payroll that may take 6 hours, we can now do it in 45 minutes and have time for additional checks and balances in it. So, yes, is it going to eliminate roles? I fully believe, and we're seeing it with inside of our organization.
Mhm.
However, it's creating different roles of what's going to be needed, just maybe not
Right.
at the same volume
Yeah.
that we maybe had before.
Yeah. That I agree. I think the inevitable is it will reduce those mundane tasks, repetitive tasks, manual tasks that can be automated, which is a good thing.
This,
It'll take time to strategize and figure out where you implement it into businesses and companies or what have you. I'm curious, from your perspective on the coaching end, where would you want AI to impact that area of your work if you could? Like, if you had a magic wand and you could make
yeah,
AI work for you, how would you
yeah.
use it in your coaching space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I will use AI today for things like if I'm getting ready to do some type of a formal presentation,
Mhm.
I will leverage AI to help me create some of that presentation, for example, right? I will take presentations that maybe I've done in the past and drop it in there. I have used AI where I will drop in some of my notes from coaching
Mhm.
sessions and say, "Hey, is there something here that you think I'm missing?" Right? Is there a piece of this? It's almost giving you a different perspective where
Yeah.
let's say I'm going to you or somebody else on your podcast and saying, "Hey, I want another perspective in this as far as I've got maybe this trickier situation that I'm trying to guide a client through. Here's some of my notes. Give me your thoughts. Are there different, is there a different approach I can take? You can use AI for that, right?
Yeah.
In that kind of conversation. So helping it to level set yourself, right? Almost bouncing ideas off
Yep.
of it like you would. Again, depends on the level, right? That you have and which tools of AI you're using are more, definitely more robust than others, but you can use it to have those conversations like you would just another professional. And so for someone who's just starting out, to me, it can be a really reasonable investment. Whether it's putting a proposal together, having it review something, helping to put together presentations, bouncing ideas. Is there an approach I didn't think about taking? That sort of thing. I think there's a lot of different routes that you can leverage it for.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost like a lot of industries and folks are building the plane as they're flying, whatever the terminology is.
Yes.
Because I've even heard certain people in corporate are saying that their industry or their company has implemented AI, but with no parameters to kind of
Yeah.
see how are you all using it
Yeah.
and kind of trial and error. And I think it'll be interesting to see what comes down the road and ways that it continues to become better and evolve.
Yeah. That's the one that I will say makes me nervous, right? From an general HR standpoint, is when I hear like businesses are allowing it to be used without any guidelines, right?
Yeah.
Because it is an incredibly powerful tool. Again, especially depending on which AI tool you're using, including some of it's not secure, right? So again, like your free
Yeah.
chat GPTs of the world aren't secure. It can leverage that information. So like if you're using confidential information, right? I talk about payroll, right? And so
Yeah.
needing to be very careful with what you're putting in these tools. You can't be using the free versions. You need to be checking what their security measures are, right? In this day and age with, cybersecurity and hacking and everything else, like you have to be so, so, so careful. And so there needs to be parameters around it. For us in our organization, we only have certain people that have access to these paid tools that are able to get in there, are able to use aspects of it, and run the material because of how, again, they're amazing, but they can also
Yeah.
be dangerous if they're not used correct.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. And I feel that there is going to be some adjustments across the coaching field in particular because it is such a you are the thing that you are packaging isn't always tangible.
Yeah.
So the market or the need is going the perspective of the need for executive coaching is going to change because people will feel that they can coach themselves. People will
Yeah.
feel that, they don't necessarily need that level of expertise. So it'll make those who are in this field make them more creative to explain their value and what
Yeah.
they can bring to the table.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. We've gone through, I know AI is the most recent disruptor, right? But if you think about like, just history, right? And kind of this general field, right? The last big one was computers, right?
Mhm.
And they disrupted the workplace, right? And how work was being done. And it did eliminate positions, right? But that doesn't mean that new positions weren't then created through that, right? And the internet, another one, right? It really transformed the workplace and how we
Yep.
communicate and the speed at which we can communicate, right? From an HR standpoint, right, with some of the more recent transitions over the last 10 years have been some of these more advanced HR and payroll systems, and we're not doing paper forms anymore, and everything's
Yeah.
electronic. And so, if you think through, there's been multiple disruptors in industry, right?
Mhm.
And there's always been this, we're not going to have jobs, right? It's going to eliminate us. And where we see businesses survive is going to be the ones that look to find where the gap still, where's that hole still, right? And so this could be a space where you're going to help coach and become an expert on AI and how executives can leverage AI
Yeah.
to be their coach, right? And there's people that are specializing in this from an HR standpoint of how do we leverage AI for HR business partners, and we're going to teach people how to do that, right? So finding where that niche is where people end up thriving, because there's always a market for, to me, for this type of support. I'll say, like, I think about like a Gusto of the world, right? That now has
Yeah.
their HR person, right? That you can pay $100 a month. It's ridiculously cheap, right? For their HR support. I'm sorry, they're never going to compete with what we provide, right?
Mhm.
You're going into a call center, right? And so making sure that as you are reaching out to clients, you're putting that pitch and that, sale, right, if you will, to them so they understand it. Leverage AI. Ask AI, hey, I am trying to compete with you in this coaching space. How should I go about differentiating myself from what you can provide? Use AI to tell you how to keep yourself in a job, right?
Exactly. Like highlighting your value prop and making sure
Yeah,
that you are communicating that to a place that your
yeah,
audience knows
yeah,
exactly how you're different.
yeah.
Shifting a little bit to what's next for you at Kaizen. Plans do you have for the future?
Yeah, great question. So, we have really been leaning into the AI space a lot. And so I would say that's been our biggest focus is how do we become those early adopters, right? How do we kind of carve our space in our HR consulting and human capital world, leveraging a lot of this AI technology? How do we, um, you know, take it to improve what we're providing as far as service levels? How do we help our clients adapt in this new world? It is really where our biggest focus is right now, and continuing to just provide stellar service, right? At the end of the day,
Yeah.
that's what differentiates, I would say, a business, right? Is the service levels that they're providing and the value that they're providing to their clients, and just really focusing on doing what we do and doing it the best that we can.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And what ways can our listeners connect with you if they are hearing this and are motivated to say, you know what, I want to tap Heather for her expertise. I am a small business owner or I am a solopreneur. How can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always, first of all, happy to have conversations, right? Zero kind of commitment on a long term engagement. I like to pay it forward, going back to our earlier
Yep.
conversation, right? I made that commitment and, 23 years old that I would be paying it forward. So I am happy to help anybody who is looking at making this leap or is struggling and just needs somebody to even just commiserate with. So my email is Albarano, so my last name Albaran at RCR consulting.com. You can also find us on the web, so RCR consulting.com. And I've also got a LinkedIn presence, both personally as well as for the company as well. I'm the only Heather Albarano out there, so it's fairly easy to find me if you do a quick Google search.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with our listeners. I'm sure they will find it valuable. And if you had, just as our last takeaway, what is your biggest piece of advice that you can give someone maybe who was in your position when you were just entering the corporate world at 23 and you didn't know which way your career was going to go? Or someone who might just be looking to transition out of corporate and perhaps start their own venture?
Trust yourself. As simple as that. Trust
Yes.
yourself.
Yes. I love that. I love that. Any last takeaways that you'd like to share here?
I could talk for hours on this subject, so I'll stop now. Probably one of the reasons I enjoy being a coach. I love imparting my experience and my wisdom. So
Love it. And we love to hear from coaches like yourself. And we thank you today, Heather, for all of the insight that you shared here on Coaches Unplugged. Thank you to all of our listeners today for being a part of this conversation that's redefining what it means to grow, lead, and create impact. If today's episode resonated with you, we want you to share it. We want you to follow along and keep the energy moving forward because the future of coaching and consulting isn't written by chance. It's written by those willing to evolve. I'm Shantina Hollie, and until next time, keep being extraordinary. Thank you.